Not every hobby makes a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And so something that you enjoy for, 10 hours a week, perhaps, you might not enjoy like from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m, 5 days a week.
Hello and welcome to In the Rising podcast. My name is Bettina Brown, and this is the platform I've chosen to talk about really living a life that's in alignment with your hopes, your dreams, your goals, your vision, basically grasping onto that life that you know you want and you desire and deserve. And my guest today is Guy Windsor, who shares really a unique story. Guy is a swordsman and really fell in love with medieval, Renaissance, swordsmanship, combat strategy, and decided that there are certain hobbies in life that are not really worth pursuing 9 to 5, but sometimes you have to follow your gut. You have to follow your purpose. And he shares how he followed that and really changed the entire trajectory of a specific set of, I don't know how to say it. Thank you. Thank you for your time today on In the Rising podcast. I just want to say I love your name, Guy Windsor. Like it's a very good name, and it sounds as you're talking about your background, historical background, Windsor, pulls up certain ideas for, and I'm like, that's
Windsor
just
Castle, yeah.
Yes.
And it's just pure luck. Right? I mean, I can take no credit for it. And there's only one other Guy Windsor that I know of who has any kind of social media presence or anything. So I got, Guy Windsor on Twitter and Facebook and all these various things. So yeah, he's an actor who lives in Singapore.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay, why not?
Yeah,
well, you have a passion, a love, and a desire where you said you switched from cabinet maker to professional swordsman.
Yeah.
What allowed you personally to make this sort of shift?
Okay, well, there's a bit of a story behind it, of course.
Yes.
But basically, after finishing my degree at Edinburgh University, I was totally fed up with abstract thought because my degree is in English, and yes, there's truth there and literary studies matter and all that sort of stuff. But I'd had like 4 years of being basically, everything was language, and there's some really, really stupid literary critical theories going on, which kind of poisoned things for me. This is in the early 90s. And, I could go into technical detail, but it would bore everybody completely, right? So I'd always had a hobby of being a woodworker since I was a kid. And I just decided that I wanted to go and do that, be a woodworker, a professional woodworker, and primarily antiques restoration and furniture making. Particularly antiques restoration, because I like old stuff and I like bringing broken old stuff back to life. And I still do it as a hobby now, even 20 years after stopping doing it for a living. And so at the time I was at university, I co-founded a historical fencing club. We didn't even know it was called historical fencing back then. We got fed up with sport fencing, me and a friend of mine. We got fed up with sport fencing because it's quite artificial. And so we discovered books written in the periods when swords were actually used for real. And we thought, well, okay, why don't we try and sword fight like these books tell us to? And so we were doing that kind of research and trying to recreate these long defunct old fencing systems. And so that's what I was doing on Wednesday nights and at the weekends. And I managed to get a job as an antiques restorer in Edinburgh, and then later on as a cabinet maker in the borders of Scotland. And so it turns out that for me, being a cabinet maker, it's a great hobby, not a good job. Not every hobby makes a good job. Mm-hmm. And so something that you enjoy for, 10 hours a week, perhaps, you might not enjoy like from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m, 5 days a week. And also, of course, as soon as it's a job, things like doing it quickly enough that you can actually make a living doing it start to come in. Whereas if you're just doing it for fun, you can spend as long as you want on any given project. So I was kind of miserable. I was in my dream job, but miserable. And what I was enjoying most was my historical fencing. And I was in my mid to late 20s, and I had this kind of gut misery going on, which wasn't serving anybody. And as is probably typical for a man of that age, I thought it had more to do with my romantic relationships, my love life and what have you, than with what I was actually doing for a living. And I got myself into this ridiculous situation where I was either going to stay in Edinburgh with one woman or move to America with someone else, right? Which is this, it was a really clear binary split. It's either stay here with her or go there with her. And I was just like, I was in bits. I was torn and tormented, and it was just awful. I deserved no sympathy whatsoever, incidentally. My behavior at that stage was not particularly stellar. But, you know, as a lifelong martial artist, I got interested in martial arts when I was very young and was training it from as soon as martial arts training could be found. So from I was about 10 years old, I think, when I had my first proper class. I thought, well, okay, there's this sort of tradition in martial arts of like often the founder of a style will be sort of in, you know, at some sort of crossroads or whatever, and will go off and go up a mountain and sit on the top of the mountain and meditate. It's a total cliche, right? But I thought, okay, I have this decision to make. I don't know what to do. And I should point out that at this stage, one of the catalysts for all of this was I'd taken up a form of shamanic meditation, so going on shamanic journeys. And we can come back to that in more detail in a minute, if you like. And so I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up into the Highlands of Scotland, climb up a hill, sit on the top, literally, and meditate until the way becomes clear. Right? So I did. Me and my friend Paul, we got in my car, we drove up to the Highlands, and in a hill outside the village where Paul grew up, called Glenuig, near Fort William in Scotland, Paul set up a tent down the bottom with the car, and I walked up the hill. It wasn't a very big hill. You don't need a very big hill for this sort of thing. Really, the mountain's inside. And I climbed up the hill, and I sat on the top. If I have an aptitude for anything, it's probably altered states of consciousness. My shamanic teacher was like really surprised by how easily I took to it. And so as I sat on the hill, within seconds, I was in the trance state. And within seconds, a voice in my head with absolute clarity, as clear as I can hear you over this pretty good internet connection, said, go to Helsinki and open a school of swordsmanship. So I was like, okay. I was not expecting it to be that quick, and I was not expecting it to be that clear. And also I was expecting it to be stay in Edinburgh with one person or move to America with this other person. I was like, that was unexpected. But the thing is, if you go to the trouble of asking, it's very, very rare to get an answer that is absolutely explicit and clear. So if you ask and you get an answer like that, you'd have to be a complete idiot not to just follow it. So I came down the hill, and Paul looked at me and was like, that was quick. I was like, yeah, done. No need to sit there for like 3 days and nights or whatever it's supposed to take. It was just like, boom, it was right there. And this was in August 2000, and March 17th, 2001, I was in Helsinki and opened my school with my first class as a professional historical martial arts teacher, having now founded my own school. The critical thing, I think, the thing that made it actually work, is that because of the nature of it, because of the way I was basically, I received an instruction from outside. Okay. It didn't say, go to Helsinki and run a successful school. It didn't set any sort of bars that I had to meet. It was just go there and do that. And I went there and I did that with absolutely 100% of everything I had. And because I wasn't afraid of failure. I think that's the critical thing, right? It put me in a state of mind where failure didn't actually matter. Because if I went there and I opened the school and I gave it 100% and the whole thing just failed abysmally, well, it wouldn't matter because I had received my instruction and I'd done it to the best of my ability, right? That's the only thing that I was going to be judged on. And so fear of failure just didn't exist. I didn't have it, which was really, really liberating. It's like, oh my God, I can fly.
Well, that's why so many people don't do something because of fear of failure, or fear of success, right?
Yeah, fear of success is the other one. Because again, one of the things that helped me avoid the fear of success trap, which was of course the other side of the coin, was that the way it was framed, success wasn't actually possible, right? Because there was no defined success state, right? When I get to this point, I have succeeded. That didn't exist. It wasn't like I had to have a certain number of students and then I'd succeeded, or I had to have a certain number of branches and then I'd succeeded. There was no reasonable way that anyone could say yes, and particularly I could not say yes, I have succeeded, and therefore there was no fear of success either. I was just doing the thing. Success and failure were just not things that I needed to consider.
What I'd like to point out is you went with option A and option B in your mind, and you were given option C to follow. What I like about that is that you were open to something that was not necessarily in your thought process, right? You were open to all options, even though you thought you only had two. And I think that culminates to what many of us feel, that we feel we have fewer options than are available. We don't always see them.
Right. And that applies in all sorts of situations. Do you quit your job and start a business, or do you keep your job? Well, you could also possibly keep your job and start a business, or you might just decide to go and become a nun. I mean, there's always more options than we can see. And this is actually part of the problem, is that in our culture these days, most of us are lucky enough to have an extraordinary breadth of choice. And that by itself is a stressor. Because, if the only thing you can do to feed your children is get up and go to work, do that, get paid, come home again and feed your children, then that's what you do. And it's not like you're free of the tyranny of choice, because actually choice is a privilege and a wonderful thing to have, but you're free of of certain kinds of stress, right? And a lot of the paralysis I think people feel these days is because there's too many choices. And marketing people have done this. If you have like 30 different flavors of jam, nobody buys anything. If you have only 6 flavors of jam, people buy loads, right? So it's natural and normal and sensible even to narrow your choices down so that there aren't so many of them that you get should I really be training to be an Olympic gymnast at the age of 47? Probably not. Okay, I can just forget about that one.
Right. But what did you do with all this, you have awesome with martial artists, and as a martial artist, I was in Taekwondo, went through the whole thing twice, and we kept moving from one end of that, I would call it the pond, it's the Atlantic, to the other. And I started over again. But being in a martial arts as well, or any sort of thing that involves discipline and mindset and all of that, how do you feel that played a part? Because you were doing that at 10 years old. How do you feel that played a part into getting you with the shamanistic education, how do you feel that got you to accept that choice of Helsinki?
Okay. Obedience is a skill, right? I don't think it's a virtue. I don't think there's anything inherently virtuous about obedience, but it is a useful life skill. And there are certain circumstances or certain situations in which if you cannot be obedient, you're going to miss out on a load of stuff. Like, let's say a friend wants to take you sailing, right? And you don't know anything about sailing. When the person who knows about sailing says duck, you just do as you're told, or you get whacked in the head with the boot, right? So, and if they can't trust you to do as you're told, they won't take you out on the boat. Okay. So obedience is a really useful life skill. And one of the things that many more traditional martial arts teachers instill in their students is obedience. I don't in mine. My approach is completely different, but it is a pretty common aspect. So there's perhaps a bit of that going on. I think most critically, the instruction I got was probably what I'd actually always wanted to do, but didn't quite have the nerve to believe that I wanted to do it. Right. So I didn't have any internal resistance to it, because it wasn't like, you know, go to Helsinki and murder 1,000 puppies. It was, go to Helsinki and open a school of swordsmanship. You mean I can actually do that? Oh, I hadn't considered that.
Like you were given permission to...
Almost, but permission to do something I didn't actually consciously know that I wanted to do. But there it was. And I mean, it suited me really well. If I have put it this way, whatever I'm doing, if I'm stuck on a problem, the best way for me to kind of overcome that problem, to find the internal resources to deal with that problem, is to conjure up an imaginary student and teach them how to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. For some reason, it's just my particular best space is when I'm teaching. I'm more patient, I'm more open, I'm more aware of what's going on. I'm able to do things physically that I can't actually do when I'm on my own. It's just like, it's my natural best state. So because I was starting a school, I had to teach a lot, and that meant I spent a lot of time in that
state of mind. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So now you are in Helsinki, you're doing this passion. I get to see you because it's a podcast, it's audio, but I get to see these amazing swords behind you.
Sure.
How did you get, like, when you were there, you opened the school, what was like your number one goal at that point? Did you make any goals for yourself?
I tend to operate instinctively, and very early on, maybe a couple of months in, I said to my students, my job is to make myself redundant. Okay. In other words, if my students are dependent on me for their development forever, then the school will die when I die. If I get hit by a bus, that's it, it's over. And I actually made myself redundant 15 years later. So my wife wanted to move to the UK for various family reasons. And so we moved to the UK in 2015, leaving my school in good hands, and it's still running 5.5 years later, no problem, without any direct input from me at all.
Yeah.
And so I said it in the moment, and when it came out of my mouth, I realized it was true. Mm-hmm. And so I gradually worked towards that goal, which makes no sense, really. You don't start something like a sword fighting school with the purpose of leaving it. And I had no actual plans to leave it. But when life happened and it became the best thing for my family for me to leave it, I was able to do so because I prepared for it for the previous however many years.
Almost from the beginning. Wow.
Yeah.
When you share your story, what would you say is one thing you've learned that you'd like someone listening to this part, this slice of pie from your story to glean from?
Okay. There's a lot, but probably the most important thing is, if you're doing the thing you're meant to be doing and you're doing it for the right reasons, people will show up to help. And I had an enormous amount of help starting the school. Friends who posted ads on various forums before I could even use a computer, and friends who like lent me training space, and friends who built me a website, and friends who hosted the website, and all sorts of things. And I'm just, there's an endless list of people who were incredibly helpful because they saw, oh, this is a cool thing. Guys doing this really cool thing. And most importantly, I think they trusted me, right? So they didn't think that helping me was somehow, if they hadn't liked me, they wouldn't have done it, right? And they didn't like me because I'm a particularly nice person. I don't think I am, right? I think they liked me because I was 100% honest about what I was trying to do, because I could afford to be 100% honest about it, because I had no fear of failure and no fear of success. So it was, if you're open and honest about what it is you really are trying to do, and it will resonate with people, not with everyone, but with enough people. And then when help appears, be gracious about it. There's absolutely no virtue in, I did this all by myself. It's the sort of thing a 3-year-old will say. And as a parent, you kind of go, oh, isn't that charming and sweet? No, you didn't do it all by yourself. But you don't say that to a 3-year-old. But to a 30-year-old, yes.
Yeah, right. I think that's such a good point that you made there, to be gracious about the help, because there's a lot of pride in, I want to do it all by myself, but we are not created single beings in like our own continents, that's how it's ingrained in us. And that the highest people who of success have always talked about who's helped them. Right. Yeah. And it's not always about money.
I'm not a self-made man by any stretch of the imagination.
Very few are.
Starting with parents and family, and but moving on through like the people who I was fencing with in Edinburgh in the 90s. And then, when I started my school, all sorts of people gave me the benefit of the doubt who really didn't have to.
Right.
And they showed up to my classes when I honestly, it was state of the art then, but it's kind of like a steam powered computer looking back, right? Because the historical side of things, and what we know about training and what we know about how to do the research and how to recreate the art, also simply the availability of equipment, all that sort of stuff has gotten infinitely better over the last 20 years, as one would hope. But so like the stuff I was teaching 20 years ago is, should we say, vastly more wrong than the stuff I'm teaching now?
Yeah.
Right. No. And it's always going to be at least a little bit wrong. That's why, science advances and, research develops over time. But ideally, you get less and less and less wrong. And actually, it comes down to being gracious about accepting help, because one of the hardest sorts of help to be gracious about accepting is when a colleague or a student or somebody says, Guy, actually, you're completely wrong about this thing that you just said. And there's the evidence, and you can go look at it, and there are two possible responses. You can go, no, I'm right, leave me alone, which is not uncommon if you're creating a cult of personality or a cult. Or you go, oh, okay, and then you change what you're teaching. And in fact, in the early days of the school, I did lose some students who wanted infallible sensei guru guy, but got kind of academic and also learning the art along with you guy, right? They needed a sort of infallible guru, and they got me instead. And I could have faked the infallible guru thing and created a cult. And actually, that's probably the biggest risk of the whole thing, particularly if you're kind of going there on a like divine mission, right? But it's the historical side of things that saves me from that, because I am never going to be completely right, because we are recreating arts that have been lost. And there's always going to be research coming up that shows us we're wrong in some sense. So also, I'm not the ultimate authority in my school, right? If any student can show me in the sources that we're working from that my interpretation of that particular bit of the source is demonstrably incorrect, then we change it. And that has happened dozens of times, right? So the students see in the very beginning that, okay, Guy is not the infallible teacher. Guy is just the most experienced researcher and martial artist and instructor in the room. And that's why we've got Guy in charge leading these classes. Yeah.
Right. Let me ask you this. What you've done so much. I mean, you've done this huge thing. What are you still rising up to? Like, what are still your goals? What are your top of the mountain experiences for you in the coming up years?
That's a really good question. Quite a while ago, I realized that while I was good at the teaching and not too bad at the research, and I could do the sword thing, I was rubbish at making a living at it. And it was actually starting to impact on my children's quality of life, right? Because we just didn't have enough money to do the things we needed to do. And so I started paying attention to the business side of things, and that got better and better. But, you know, that's useful and necessary, but it's not fundamentally interesting to me. The thing I'm currently working on, which is difficult, it's really hard, which is one of the things that makes it a worthy goal, is because historical martial arts as a kind of movement began in the early 90s, and it was mostly young men at universities and who started these things. Now, most of the kind of best known figures in my field are middle-aged white dudes. Okay. And that's just a thing that occurred naturally, and it wasn't deliberate on anybody's part. But one of the things we have not been terribly good at as a community as a whole is encouraging more women, people of color, and so on to take up the art, because they come to class, but they don't see anybody like them in the higher ranks or teaching classes. Okay. So the problem I've been working on for the last couple of years is, how can I, as a middle-aged white dude, right, promote diversity within historical martial arts? One tactic in the service of that goal is my podcast. It's called The Sword Guy, because, you know, the Sword Guy, that's how everybody thinks of me, at least in my family. Oh, it's Guy, it's the Sword Guy. So, you know, half of my guests are women, and, you know, many of my guests are from, you know, places other than, should we say, white America or white Britain, because I have a platform in my field. I'm pretty well known. You know, I've been working in it for 20 years, and I have a platform. And one thing I can do is I can invite people who are not like me onto the platform. Right? You know, we do have the occasional sort of token middle-aged straight white dude every now and then, just to kind of, you know.
It still exists too. Yeah.
They still exist, and they're demographic. But as I point out to some people who are less pleased about my approach, is that there's a middle-aged white dude in every single episode. Right?
Yes, very right. True, very true. Right. So someone listening and is just inspired by many things. Maybe it's the sword guy, or, you know, like, wow, the leap of faith, and it's not necessarily a leap of faith or obedience that you followed, and would just like to learn more about your podcast, about you. How can they, where are you? List out where they can find you.
My name is Guy Windsor, and I've got guywindsor.net, but also guywindsor.com and guywindsor.org. So it doesn't really matter which one you put in. And there you can find sort of bio, and guywindsor.net/podcast will take you to the podcast, /books will take you to my books, and so on and so on. So, yeah, guywindsor.net is like the main book. So if you just put my name and maybe sword on the end into Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever, you will find me.
So this was just an interesting podcast interview. I can't wait to put this on YouTube one day, because he just had this phenomenal backdrop of all these different kinds of swords, and really shared that he followed something that he didn't even know he'd wanted. He didn't even know he desired to start a school. And he really thought it would be option A or option B. And he decided to follow through with option C. The school in Finland, in Helsinki, is still thriving. It is still doing well. And he's left a legacy. He's left an impact. And now he's using that to change also the landscape of people who are interested in this area and allowing more women to come in and allow a more diverse group of people to experience the joy that he also finds joy in. And so I really applaud him for his work. And if you are interested in learning more about Guy Windsor, I have all of his links down below. So I feel this is a really interesting podcast. If you like it, share it with someone that you know, because the more hands and ears that we put this in, the better off we can be and the people that we share this to. I also have an ask. Please leave a heartfelt, honest answer as a review to help promote this podcast and really get it to more people that it can make an impact on. Lastly, I'd like to tell you thank you, because time is something we don't get back. And so I'm very grateful for your time today. And until next time, let's keep building one another up.